John Mitchell stood in front of his bathroom mirror, adjusting his tie for the third time. At 32, he had everything going for him. A successful career as a software engineer, a beautiful home in the upscale Summerlin neighborhood of Las Vegas, and most importantly, he was about to propose to the love of his life, Jasmine Taylor. "Man, you're really doing this," he said to his reflection, patting the ring box in his pocket for the 100th time. His best friend since college, Marcus Thompson, was sprawled on John's leather couch downstairs, playing with his phone. Marcus had helped John pick out the ring, a stunning 3-carat diamond that cost more than John's Tesla Model 3. "Yo, D," Marcus called up. "We gonna be late for these reservations or what?" John took one last look in the mirror. Everything had to be perfect tonight. He'd been planning this proposal for months, and Marcus had been there every step of the way. From choosing the ring, to selecting the restaurant, to helping set up the elaborate proposal plan. That's what best friends were for, right? Marcus and John had met during their freshman year at UNLV. They were both computer science majors, both from working-class families in North Las Vegas, both determined to make something of themselves. While John had gone the corporate route after graduation, Marcus had started his own tech consulting firm. They'd supported each other through every success and failure. When John met Jasmine 2 years ago at a charity gala, Marcus had been the first person he called. "Bro, I think I just met my wife," John had said that night. Marcus laughed. "Slow down, Romeo. At least get her number first." But John had been right. Jasmine was everything he'd ever wanted. Brilliant. She was a pediatric surgeon, beautiful, with warm brown skin and natural hair she wore in elaborate styles. And kind, she volunteered at homeless shelters on weekends. Their first date led to a second, then a third, and before they knew it, they were inseparable. Marcus had been there through it all, becoming close friends with Jasmine too. The three of them often hung out together, watching movies, having dinner, going hiking in Red Rock Canyon. People joked that they were a package deal. Now, as John headed downstairs, Marcus stood up and gave him a once-over. "Looking sharp, bro," Marcus said, straightening John's tie slightly. "She's gonna say yes for sure. You think?" John couldn't help the nervous tremor in his voice. "Man, that girl is crazy about you. Trust me, I know these things." They drove to Nomad Restaurant at Park MGM in John's Tesla, Marcus constantly checking his phone to make sure all the arrangements were in place. He'd helped coordinate with the restaurant staff, the violinist, and the photographer who would capture the moment. "Everything's set," Marcus confirmed as they pulled up to the valet. "You ready for this?" John took a deep breath. "Been ready since the day I met her." They walked into the restaurant's elegant interior, all dark wood and velvet drapes. Jasmine was already waiting at the bar, stunning in a red dress that hugged her curves. Her hair was styled in a crown of braids, and her smile lit up the room when she saw them. "My two favorite men," she said, hugging them both. Was it John's imagination, or did her hug with Marcus last a beat too long? He shook off the thought. Tonight wasn't about paranoid fantasies. Tonight was about their future. The meal was perfect. Wagyu beef, truffle risotto, vintage champagne. As dessert approached, John felt the ring box burning a hole in his pocket. Marcus excused himself to take a call, right on schedule. "Jasmine," John began, taking her hand across the table. "These past 2 years have been the best of my life." He never got to finish his carefully rehearsed speech, because at that moment, his phone buzzed with a text, then another, and another. "Sorry," he said, reaching for his phone. "Let me just turn this off." But the name on the screen made him pause. It was from Sharon, his cousin who worked as a housekeeper at the Red Rock Casino Resort. "Don't propose," the first message read. "Marcus and Jasmine together at a hotel last week. I saw them. Have video proof." John's world tilted on its axis. He looked up at Jasmine, who was watching him with concerned eyes. "Baby, you okay? You look pale." His phone buzzed again. This time, it was a video attachment. With trembling fingers, he pressed play. The video was grainy security camera footage, but there was no mistaking the figures entering room 847 at the Red Rock Casino Resort. Marcus, in his signature red and black Jordan sneakers, had his arm around Jasmine's waist. She was wearing the same yellow dress she'd worn to her girls' night out the previous week. As they reached the door, They turned toward each other, and even in the poor quality footage, their passionate kiss was unmistakable. The timestamp read 11:47 p.m. last Friday night. John felt bile rising in his throat. The room spun. The ring box in his pocket suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "John?" Jasmine's voice seemed to come from far away. "What's wrong?" He looked up at her, really looked at her. How many times had she lied to his face? How many girls' nights, and late surgeries had really been rendezvous with Marcus? "Room 847, he said quietly. The color drained from Jasmine's face. "What?" "Red Rock Resort, last Friday night, room 847. His voice was eerily calm. "Ring any bells?" Jasmine's hand flew to her mouth. "John, I can explain." "Don't." He held up his hand. "Just don't." Right on cue, Marcus returned to the table, all smiles. "Everything good here? Ready for dessert?" John stood up slowly, his chair scraping against the floor. The other diners were starting to stare, but he didn't care. "How long?" he asked, looking between them. Marcus's smile faltered. "What you talking about, bro?" "Don't call me bro." John's shout echoed through the restaurant. Heads turned. A waiter started moving in their direction. He pulled out his phone and held it up, showing them the video. "How long?" Jasmine burst into tears. Marcus stepped forward, hands raised placatingly. Let's take this somewhere private." 6 months, Jasmine whispered. "It's been going on for 6 months. The world stopped. 6 months. Half a year of lies, half a year of betrayal. While he was picking out rings and planning proposals, his girlfriend and best friend were..." John reached into his pocket and pulled out the ring box. He flipped it open and set it on the table. "I hope you both rot in hell," he said quietly, then turned and walked out of the restaurant. He barely remembered the drive home. His phone kept buzzing with calls and texts from both of them, but he ignored them all. When he finally reached his house, he went straight to his home gym in the basement and started hitting his punching bag. He hit it until his knuckles bled. He hit it until his arms felt like lead. He hit it until the sun came up. Over the next few weeks, details emerged. Friends and family came forward with things they'd noticed but hadn't wanted to tell him. The lingering looks, the inside jokes, the way Marcus and Jasmine always seemed to arrive at group events at exactly the same time. John threw himself into his work, pulling 16-hour days at the office. He blocked both their numbers, unfriended them on social media, and told mutual friends he didn't want to hear anything about either of them. But Vegas was a small town in many ways, especially in their circles. He couldn't avoid hearing that Marcus had moved in with Jasmine barely a month after the restaurant incident. Or that they were suddenly a very public couple, posting loved-up photos on Instagram and Facebook. Then, 3 months after the fateful night at Nomad, an envelope arrived at his office. Inside was an invitation. "You are cordially invited to celebrate the wedding of Marcus Thompson and Jasmine Taylor." The date was set for Valentine's Day, 2020, at the luxurious Wynn Las Vegas. John stared at the invitation for a long time. Then he picked up his phone and called his cousin Sharon. "I need a favor," he said when she answered. "Actually, I need several favors." "Anything," Sharon replied. She'd been the one to expose the affair, after all. She knew what this meant to him. "First, I need you to find out exactly which ballroom they're using at the Wynn. Then I need you to get me the names of every vendor they're using. Florist, caterer, DJ, everything." "What are you planning, John?" He looked at the invitation again, his finger tracing over the embossed letters. "Justice," he said simply. "I'm planning justice." Over the next few months, John meticulously crafted his revenge. He called in favors, spent money freely, and created elaborate contingency plans. Everything had to be perfect, just like the proposal that never happened. John's plan required patience, precision, and an extensive network of people who owed him favors or were willing to be paid handsomely for their discretion. Over the years, his software engineering expertise had helped many Vegas businesses upgrade their systems at discounted rates. Now it was time to cash in those chips. His first move was getting Sharon promoted to supervisor of events at the Wynn. This gave her access to all the wedding planning details. Every week, she updated him on any changes to the arrangements. "They've booked the Lafitte Ballroom," she told him one evening over dinner. 400 guests. Marcus is really flexing his tech money. John nodded, making notes on his iPad. Who's handling security? Elite Force Security, the same company that handles most high-end events at the Wynn. Perfect. John had upgraded their scheduling software last year. He still had backdoor access to their systems. Next, he reached out to his old college roommate, Xavier, who now owned one of the largest audiovisual companies in Vegas. "I need everything they say during the ceremony recorded crystal clear," John explained. "Every word, every whisper." "Consider it done," Xavier assured him. "I'll handle the AV setup myself." The pieces were falling into place. Through various connections, John managed to get copies of the seating charts, the reception timeline, even the exact minute the couple planned to say their vows. But the masterstroke came through his younger sister, Aaliyah, who worked as a wedding planner. She happened to know Jasmine's maid of honor, Kimberly, who loved to talk after a few glasses of wine. "They're writing their own vows," Aaliyah reported back. "And get this, Marcus is planning to sing his." John allowed himself a small smile. "Any idea what song?" "All of Me" by John Legend. "Apparently, it's their song now." Aaliyah rolled her eyes. "Kim says they dance to it in the kitchen while cooking dinner. The same song John and Jasmine used to dance to. The same song that had been on his proposal playlist." January flew by in a flurry of preparation. John maintained his normal routine at work, even accepting a major project that required late nights at the office. No one suspected anything unusual. He even started dating again. Casually, nothing serious. Just enough to throw off any suspicion that he might still be hung up on Jasmine. 2 weeks before the wedding, he met with his final collaborator, a brilliant hacker named Trinity, who'd once been his intern. "Everything's set on the technical side," she confirmed, showing him her laptop screen. "I can trigger it all from here with one keystroke." "And it can't be traced back to us?" Trinity smiled. "Please. I bounced this through so many servers it would take the NSA 10 years to track it." The night before the wedding, John sat in his home office, reviewing everything one last time. On his desk sat an innocent-looking USB drive that contained months of work and planning. His phone buzzed. It was a text from Marcus. "I know we're not cool, but I still consider you my brother. I'm sorry for how everything went down. I never meant to hurt you." John read the message 3 times, then typed out a response. "Water under the bridge. I hope tomorrow is everything you deserve." He smiled as he hit send. Oh, it would be everything they deserved. All right. Valentine's Day dawned bright and clear. Perfect weather for a wedding. John dressed carefully in a tailored black suit, making sure every detail was perfect. In his breast pocket, he carried the USB drive and a small remote control. As he adjusted his tie in the mirror, the same mirror where he'd prepared to propose all those months ago, his phone buzzed again. This time it was Sharon. "Everything's in place. You sure about this?" John took one last look at his reflection. The man in the mirror wasn't the same lovesick fool who'd planned to propose at Nomad Restaurant. This man's eyes were harder, colder. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," he replied. He grabbed his keys and headed for his car. It was time to crash a wedding. The Lafitte Ballroom was transformed into a winter wonderland, despite the desert heat outside. White roses and crystal decorations sparkled under the chandeliers. Sharon had been right. Marcus had spared no expense. John slipped in through a service entrance, nodding to the security guard, who'd been well paid to look the other way. He made his way to the control room, where Xavier was setting up the audio equipment. "Everything good?" John asked, handing over the USB drive. Xavier plugged it into his system. "Ready to go." "You sure about this, man? Once we start, there's no turning back." They didn't turn back when they were sneaking around behind my back, did they? The ballroom began filling with guests. John watched through the control room's monitors as Las Vegas's black elite arrived in their finest attire. He recognized many faces: mutual friends who'd chosen sides after the breakup, business associates who'd pretended not to know about the affair, family members who'd kept their secrets. At 2:45 p.m., Marcus arrived with his groomsmen, looking confident in a white tuxedo. John's fists clenched involuntarily as he watched his former best friend laughing and joking, without a care in the world. "Showtime in 15 minutes, Xavier announced, checking his watch. John pulled out his phone and sent a text to Trinity. "Start Phase 1. Across town, Trinity's fingers flew across her keyboard, triggering the first part of their plan. In the bridal suite, where Jasmine was making her final preparations, all the phones suddenly lit up with incoming messages. Through the surveillance cameras, John watched as Jasmine's bridesmaids reached for their phones. Confusion spread across their faces as they opened their messages. Each phone displayed the same video, security footage from room 847, showing Marcus and Jasmine's various encounters over the months they'd been sneaking around. Sharon had been busy collecting evidence long before she'd sent that first warning text to John. Jasmine, resplendent in her designer wedding gown, noticed the commotion. "What's wrong?" Kimberly, her maid of honor, looked up from her phone with tears in her eyes. "Girl, you need to see this." But before Jasmine could watch the video, the wedding coordinator burst in. "It's time." The ceremony was set to begin. 400 guests sat expectantly as the string quartet began playing. The bridesmaids walked down the aisle, their phones still buzzing in their bouquets. Then, the music changed to the traditional wedding march. The doors opened, and Jasmine appeared on her father's arm. She was beautiful, there was no denying that. Her gown was a masterpiece of white lace and crystals, her makeup flawless, her smile radiant. If you didn't know better, you'd think she was the picture of innocent bridal joy. As she reached the altar, Marcus took her hand, grinning like he'd won the lottery. The officiant began the ceremony. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." John pressed a button on his remote. On cue, the massive screens that had been set up to show close-ups of the ceremony suddenly flickered. The officiant's voice was replaced by another sound, surveillance audio from room 847. "What about John?" Jasmine's voice filled the ballroom. "What he doesn't know won't hurt him," Marcus replied, followed by the unmistakable sounds of kissing. The screens showed the security footage, crystal clear, thanks to Trinity's enhancement work. Every guest could see Marcus and Jasmine entering the hotel room, their guilty glances, their passionate embraces. Gasps echoed through the ballroom. Someone screamed. Marcus and Jasmine stood frozen at the altar, their faces pale with shock. But John wasn't done. He pressed another button. The footage changed to show other encounters. Marcus and Jasmine sneaking into her apartment building, meeting in restaurant parking lots, sharing intimate moments when they thought no one was watching. Then came the text messages, hundreds of them, displayed on the screens for all to see. "I miss you, baby," Marcus to Jasmine, sent while he was helping John shop for engagement rings. "Can't wait to see you tonight. Tell Dee you're working late." Jasmine to Marcus, sent the night before they were caught. "We need to tell him soon. I can't keep living this lie." Marcus, "Just wait until after his promotion. I don't want to stress him before his big presentation." Jasmine, the ballroom erupted in chaos. Guests stood up, phones recording everything. Jasmine's father stormed toward Marcus, fists raised. The bridesmaids burst into tears. Someone shouted, "Home wrecker!" But the finale was still to come. John pressed the final button on his remote. The screens changed one last time, showing a familiar scene, the night at Nomad Restaurant. Security footage showed Marcus and Jasmine arriving separately, meeting in the parking lot for a quick kiss before entering through different doors. It showed Marcus taking a call while actually texting the hotel to confirm their reservation for later that night. And finally, it showed John receiving Sharon's warning texts, his world shattering in real time. The footage faded to black, replaced by white text on a dark screen. "Happy Valentine's Day. Love, John." The chaos that erupted in the Lafite Ballroom would be talked about in Las Vegas social circles for years to come. The perfectly orchestrated wedding dissolved into a scene of absolute pandemonium. Jasmine collapsed onto the altar steps, her $15,000 wedding dress pooling around her like spilled cream. Her carefully applied makeup ran in black streaks down her face as she sobbed uncontrollably. The bouquet of white roses lay forgotten at her feet, petals scattered across the marble floor. Marcus, his white tuxedo now wrinkled from his confrontation with Jasmine's father, stood shell-shocked in the middle of the chaos. His eyes darted around the room, searching for the source of this destruction. He knew. Somehow, he knew exactly who was behind this. "John," he shouted at the ceiling, his voice cracking. "I know you're here. Show yourself." But John was already slipping out of the control room, a satisfied smile playing on his lips. He'd seen enough. As he walked through the service corridor, he could hear the continuing uproar from the ballroom. "Get your hands off my daughter." I knew something wasn't right about them. "Someone call security. Keep recording. This is going viral." Outside in the casino, normal life continued. Tourists fed quarters into slot machines, oblivious to the drama unfolding in the ballroom. John walked calmly through the gaming floor, his revenge complete. His phone buzzed, a text from Trinity. "Videos are trending on Twitter. Wedding from Hell is already getting thousands of hits." Another buzz, this time from Xavier. "Damn bro, that was cold, but they deserved it." A third message from Sharon. "Security's trying to clear the ballroom. Half the guests are refusing to leave until they get their gifts back." John ignored them all. He walked out into the bright Las Vegas afternoon, loosening his tie as he headed for the parking garage. Behind him, he could hear sirens. Someone had apparently called the police. But he wasn't worried. Everything had been legal, unethical perhaps, cruel, definitely, but not illegal. The surveillance footage had been obtained through proper channels. The text messages were all authenticated. The audio recordings were made in public places. He had destroyed their perfect day with nothing but the truth. As he reached his car, a familiar voice called out, "John, wait!" He turned to see Kimberly, Jasmine's maid of honor, running toward him in her burgundy bridesmaid dress, heels clicking on the concrete. "I knew it had to be you," she said, slightly out of breath. I wanted to say, I'm sorry. I suspected something was going on, but I didn't want to believe it." John studied her face. "How long did you know?" "I had suspicions for about 3 months. The way they looked at each other at group events, how Jasmine always seemed to know where Marcus was, what he was doing." She shook her head. "I should have told you." "Yes, you should have." His voice was cold. "You were supposed to be her best friend, but you helped her deceive me." Kimberly flinched. "I know, that's why." She paused, taking a deep breath. "That's why I slipped their wedding video footage to Trinity last week. I knew she worked for you." John's eyebrows rose slightly. That explained why the wedding planning footage had been so detailed. He'd assumed Trinity had hacked into the videographer's cloud storage. "Consider us even," he said, opening his car door. "John?" Kimberly called as he started to get in. "Was it worth it? Do you feel better now?" He paused, considering the question. Did he feel better? The rage that had been burning in his chest for months had cooled to embers. The pain hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed into something else, something that felt almost like peace. "Ask me again in a year," he replied, then got into his Tesla and drove away. The aftermath of the wedding scandal spread through Las Vegas like wildfire. By nightfall, Wedding from Hell was trending nationally on Twitter. Local news stations ran the story on their evening broadcasts. Entertainment websites posted clips of the footage. Marcus and Jasmine's public humiliation was complete. John sat in his new corner office looking out over the Las Vegas Strip. The past year had been transformative. After the wedding incident, he'd thrown himself into his work with renewed focus. The promotion he'd been working toward when everything fell apart had come through, along with a substantial raise. His phone buzzed, a text from Sharon. "Guess who I just saw at Whole Foods?" He didn't need to guess. Even a year later, his friends still kept him updated on Marcus and Jasmine's whereabouts, despite his insistence that he didn't care anymore. The scandal had hit them hard. Marcus's tech company had mutually agreed to part ways with him after their biggest client pulled out, uncomfortable with the negative publicity. He'd eventually found work with a smaller firm in Henderson, taking a significant pay cut in the process. Jasmine had it worse. Her medical practice's Yelp page was flooded with negative reviews referencing the wedding disaster. Eventually, she'd sold her partnership and moved to a practice in Summerlin, starting over as an associate physician. They were still together, from what John heard, living in a modest apartment in Henderson, keeping a low profile. Their grand dreams of being Vegas's power couple had evaporated in the wake of their public humiliation. Sometimes late at night, John wondered if he'd gone too far. The revenge had been complete, devastating, perfectly executed. But had it brought him peace? His phone buzzed again. This time it was a dating app notification. He'd started seeing someone new, Rachel, a corporate attorney he'd met at a charity gala. She was brilliant, honest, and had never once lied about her whereabouts. "Dinner tonight? I know it's Valentine's Day, but I promise no proposals or wedding talk," her message read. John smiled. Rachel knew his story. Everyone in their social circle did, and she understood his complicated relationship with this particular holiday. "Dinner sounds perfect," he replied, "but let's skip Nomad Restaurant." As he put his phone down, his eye caught the frame on his desk. It wasn't a photo. Instead, it contained a quote he'd hung there shortly after the wedding incident: "Living well is the best revenge." And he was living well. His career was thriving. He had true friends who'd stood by him. He was dating again, cautiously but optimistically. The anger that had driven him to orchestrate such an elaborate revenge had faded, replaced by something that felt like wisdom. The engagement ring he'd never given to Jasmine now sat in a safety deposit box at his bank. He'd thought about selling it, but keeping it seemed like a reminder, not of what he'd lost, but of what he'd learned. Trust, once broken, was like a mirror. You could glue it back together, but you'd always see the cracks. Better to start fresh with a new mirror, one that reflected truth from the beginning. His office phone buzzed, his assistant reminding him about his afternoon meeting. John stood up, straightening his tie. He had a company to help run, projects to oversee, a life to live. As he walked to the conference room, he passed a wall of windows overlooking the city. In the distance, he could just make out the Wynn, its golden towers gleaming in the desert sun. The sight no longer filled him with bitterness. Some people might say his revenge had been too harsh, too public, too cruel. Maybe they were right, but in the end, all he'd done was expose the truth, their truth, to the world. And the truth, as they say, sets you free.